Spoiler warning. This video will spoil all of Uncharted 3, as well as parts of Uncharted 1 and 2. The Uncharted series was considered great, one of unbelievably high quality. And that sentiment was commonplace after the initial trilogy ended. Uncharted 3 was believed to be a capstone. Its developers, Naughty Dog Entertainment, had made 3 Crash games, 3 Jak and Daxter games, and now 3 Uncharted games. Uncharted 1 was a game that showcased great graphics, great writing, great performances, and mediocre gameplay. Uncharted 2 amped up the story, had better characters, better graphics, amazing performances, and wonderful environments and set pieces to better hold the player's attention away from its average gameplay. The third installment of the series is a mismatched hodgepodge of both Drake's Fortune and Among Thieves, combined with some of the most baffling narrative decisions in the series so far. So is the third game the epic finale of the first Uncharted series of games, or is it a muddy cloud of tropes that the series has come to rely on? Let's find out as we dive right into Uncharted 3, Drake's Deception. Every Uncharted game has opened with a quote. That isn't anything special, lots of things start and end with quotes. The only reason I'm bringing it up now is here, in the third Uncharted game, it's the first and only time that the quote is ever read out loud. To be honest, none of these quotes have ever really stuck with me. I don't find any of them particularly interesting, but it is weird that the game opens up in a way that the audience is almost familiar with. But moving on, the game starts in London at a bar full of nothing but bald dudes, and Nathan, Drake, and Sully are here to exchange Drake's iconic ring for a briefcase of cash. The cash carrier, Talbot, is going to be one of our main antagonists for the game, and it's weird having him get introduced now so early, but I'll get to Talbot later down the road. Drake and Sully bail out on the deal, and the game opens with melee combat. I have reviewed both previous Uncharted games, and I've complained enough about how mediocre the gunplay in these games is. I never really complained about the melee combat, mainly because it's so bad I try to avoid punching people as much as possible. This opening brawl scene is brutally boring, and the worst intro by far. It's like really janky Arkham City combat. You have a punch button, a counter button, and a grab button. None of them really matter since the game just flashes on screen what buttons you need to hit and when. It's just really dull. And writing this review after playing the whole game, let me tell you, this game loves its punching sequences. So Sully and Drake fight their way out of the bar, but are cornered by a posh lady named Kate. She's Talbot's boss, and she has history with our two heroes. She takes Drake's ring from him, and then a goon of hers, Charlie Cutter, shoots Nate and Sully dead. Kate and Talbot drive off, and we drift into a flashback. Now we're in Colombia, playing as a teenage Nathan Drake, looking at a museum full of Francis Drake stuff. This game opens with about an hour of walking and talking. We're deep in the walkie-talkie narrative era of video games, and Uncharted 3 is real big on these segments. Nate finds a gold mechanism and the iconic ring he carries in the games. It turns out those two are connected. Younger Sully and Kate show up, and Kate and her suits try to kill Drake for the ring, and the kid is eventually saved by Sullivan. The two then team up, and the rest is history. I don't want to spend too much time in this flashback, but I hate it. For a lot of reasons. There is a lot of walking and talking in this flashback, and this meeting and eventual partnership between Nathan Drake and Victor goddamn Sullivan is so lame. It's weird to me that like a 13-year-old boy is teaming up with a middle-aged man just because the audience knows that these two are going to be good friends and partners 20 years in the future. The other thing about this flashback I don't like, and truly the main thing I don't like, is that golden mechanism. Throughout this game, and this game exclusively, people will constantly be talking about how Nate apparently never shut up about this golden plate, or the ring, or any of the upcoming plot. But that makes you wonder, because in the very first game, Nathan Drake explains that he used his ring to uncover the coffin's coordinates. You'd think that That was the big clue the ring was hiding. We go through a whole ass video game following Francis Drake's clues. We even see Francis Drake's corpse. Nate even leaves the ring on the corpse of Francis Drake in the middle of a monster-infested catacomb. But why? Why would Drake be 20 years late in investigating the golden plate? Why wouldn't he bring it up while they were on the island of Francis Drake's corpse? Why would he leave the ring behind? I'm getting ahead of myself. The point is that this flashback introduces a lot of questions that it has no real interest in answering, mainly because it's a retcon. They're adding a past to these characters they didn't account for originally, and so the actions of previous games don't make a lot of sense with current context. It turns out Charlie Cutter wasn't working for Kate and Talbot, but instead is friends with Drake and Sully. They fake their deaths, and then the three of them begin to tail the British folks. Chloe is also here for the mission, and I like the idea of a group of thieves going on a mission together. But they drop Chloe immediately, and Cutter and Sully are just AI that hang in the back and follow Drake whenever he moves into another room. They track down Kate, who is now and forever called Marlowe, to a secret Knights Templar room full of old crap, and that's where they've been hiding the golden plate from 20 years ago. Drake pockets the golden disc and the group bails out. They also pocketed a book from Lawrence of Arabia. They combine the information of Lawrence of Arabia and Francis Drake together to find Aram of the Pillars, a city of immeasurable wealth. It turns out there are these two castles/towers that are related to Crusaders, and that the group has got to investigate both of them in order to find the coordinates to Aram. One of these towers is in France, and the other is in Syria. Nate and Sully go to France and magically end up at a castle surrounded by jungle terrain, and as they investigate the castle, Talbot and the Suits show up. While dealing with the Suits and exploring the castle, Nate and Sully come across man-eating bugs that are extremely reminiscent of the man-eating beetle swarms from the 1990s Mummy movie. Talbot burns the castle down, and Drake and Sully barely escape. The castle level is actually pretty solid. The platforming and the puzzles here are good. I like the idea of exploring a big mansion and it having secret passages and hallways and stuff. Overall, it's very solid until you get to the end. Once the building is lit on fire and crumbling, it's a little too much to have to dodge burning debris and also Suits with guns. It's weird that the Suits stay behind to shoot Drake just to ultimately die doing so. It's weird to have enemies hanging around a clearly dangerous area just so they can be fodder for the main character. After Nate and Sully leave the castle, Sully says he's losing the plot. Yeah, me too, brother. Him and Drake argue for a bit about how Nate has his pride tangled up in all of this and it's gonna get everybody killed, and this is like the thesis statement of the game. So many characters are gonna say the exact same thing to Nathan Drake throughout this adventure, and it's just bizarre, because Nathan Drake never seems any more obsessed with finding Aram of the Pillars than he does with finding Shambhala or El Dorado. But this time he's got his pride tangled up in it, because the game says so, I guess. The two fly over to Syria to help out Chloe and Cutter, because if Talbot followed them to France, the Suits would have followed the others to Syria. Our heroes sneak into the historical site and meet up with Charlie and Chloe. Cutter explains who Marlowe and the Suits are, basically a secret organization of British people. The Suits then show up, and here we get a few stealth and shooting segments. And I'm not sure if this is the PS4 port or if it's in the actual game, but there are several points in this level where there is like gunfighting and combat, but zero music, and it's very awkward. Also, it's here where Uncharted 3 decides to confirm a new enemy type. This big brawler dude from the beginning of the game wasn't a one-off segment. Instead, they're going to be a recurring encounter, and they are so boring. The little melee minigame you gotta play with them is just not fun, and it takes way too long. Whatever, the gang goes full Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade and hunts down tombs of Crusader knights. And this one globe puzzle is incredibly frustrating. You gotta like turn it at a very specific angle in a specific way. It's too time consuming and I don't know, not very mentally taxing, just frustrating. Nate and his friends get the last piece of the puzzle that they need from Syria, and as they're leaving, they run into Talbot. Talbot gets shot but is then totally fine, Cutter breaks his leg, and our team escapes. They need to go to Yemen, but Cutter is injured, so he's out, and Chloe gives Drake the same speech Sully did, and she also bails. Sully and Nate fly into Yemen and are helped out by journalist and estranged wife of Nathan Drake, Elena Fisher. The two awkwardly dance around while she has a wedding ring on, and then Elena immediately guesses why they're there because I guess everybody but me knows all about Marlo and Nate's obsession with beating her. Yemen is the worst part of the game. There is a lot of walkie-talkie segments here, and you can see that the game wants you walking and talking on a very specific path, because otherwise the game just starts breaking down. We also get Elena saying that Sully would follow Nate to the ends of the earth, despite Sully dipping out after the first mission of Uncharted 2. But moving on, we get a fist fight, which leads into the trio just randomly finding the secret hidden entrance that has all the clues to find Aram of the Pillars. There's a gear puzzle here, and it's kind of whatever, but I do not like the shadow mural puzzle. It's a little too guessy on what you need to be doing, and it's not entirely clear how to solve it. They say finish the mural, but that can mean a lot of things. We get to the end of the line here where Sully memorizes a star map that will lead them to Aram, and also just flagrant warnings about how the treasure is bad news and terrible, and don't go there. Please, please don't go to Aram of the Pillars. Oh my god, it would be so bad. Please don't go. Then the killer bugs make a comeback for a third time, and I'm just over them. The idea with these bugs is that they don't like fire, so you gotta stay in the light, but it doesn't really add anything to the platforming or combat, and this stuff doesn't add anything to the gameplay. It just adds more restrictions. After escaping, Drake gets drugged by Talbot, and now we gotta do another walkie-talkie segment. This time, we're tripping balls. Whoa! Drake is captured by Marlo and her crew. She reveals some stuff about Drake's past, most importantly that his last name is not Drake. This doesn't get elaborated on, and Nate just goes berserk and chases after Talbot in a very long chase sequence. YouTuber Hyperbit Hero made a fantastic video that explains Talbot and this chase scene in particular. Talbot is a confusing character because he can get shot and be totally fine, teleport, and then act all types of inconsistently. Talbot is normally the one hunting and fighting Drake, but in this chase, it's Drake who's hunting Talbot, and that doesn't really make sense because they're not given a reason why the tables have turned. In Hyperbit's video, he shows a clip from the Uncharted developers who say that they just already had this chase sequence made, and they didn't know who or why Drake was going to be chasing them. They just had the sequence already. And that's a pretty big insight into how this game was made. So much of this game feels underwhelming and out of place, and that interview just kind of really enforces how the game ended up as it did. But hey, speaking of things that are underwhelming and out of place, let's go on a boat. So Nate gets captured and put on a wrecked ship. Here we meet Captain Ramses for about 2 seconds. Ramses threatens to torture Sully for the way to Aram. Nate then escapes, shoots his way through the metal harbor, and then hops on a pirate-filled cruise ship. Ramses actually doesn't have Sully, but he does have a sinking ship, and the ship sequence of chapters is kind of reminiscent of the train chapters from Uncharted 2. While the train level is long, it constantly feels engaging because the platforming and enemy encounters are always progressing in difficulty, and visually, you're always moving forward along the train. In this boat section, it's difficult to understand where you're going and how you end up there and what you're really doing. Honestly, the section only took me about an hour to get from captured cutscene to washing up on shore, but it was for sure the longest hour of the entire game for me. Drake shows up at Elena's apartment and she tells him that Sully's been taken by the suits and they're on a caravan ride to Aram of the Pillars. Elena has a plan to sneak onto a cargo plane that's going to be airdropping supplies to the caravan, so the couple plans to sneak through the airport and get onto the cargo plane. Except they don't really sneak through shit. They get into a shootout almost immediately, and then Elena drives Nate to the plane. Now, I said that the ship was kind of like the train level, but the plane section is the big iconic moment, you know? It's supposed to be the train level equivalent. Elena even drops Drake off on the plane the exact same way as she does dropping him off on the train in Uncharted 2. They even reference it, you know, in case you forgot. But the plane scene is good. It's a good section of the game. It's just only like 5 minutes long. It's incredibly brief, and basically, right after the shootout ends and you climb those crates, Drake flies through the air and ends up stranded in a desert. And then you spend twice, if not 3 times, if not 4 times as long walking around the desert than you did in the fun plane sequence. Drake eventually arrives at a ghost town in the desert, and this level is also pretty fun. A lot of different shootout sections, and they have this cool mechanic where you can shoot pillars to break them, which is used to deal with an armored car. Granted, this pillar mechanic doesn't return again for the rest of the game, but while it's here, it is cool. At the end of the level, Nate is pinned down and some Yemen cavalry show up to rescue him. Coincidentally, the cavalry are also after Marlowe's caravan, and so Drake teams up with them, and we get another caravan chase level. Sully's rescued, the caravan is ruined, and Nate and Sully end up at the gates of Aram with the pillars. Drake starts hallucinating, and these firehead enemies show up, and they're just the fucking worst. They teleport, have insta-kill firebombs, and they have a ton of HP. The combination of teleporting and having more than average hit points makes them incredibly infuriating to fight, and it leads to some of the most frustrating combat sections I've had in the series so far. After the hallucinating is done, this level is actually good. Probably the best level in terms of gunplay, but also just visually. Aram looks beautiful, the colors all really pop, and it's got just a great theme going for it, this golden oasis. Sully and Nate find out that there is a mystical jar, and that's the reason behind the hallucinogens in the water supply. Marlowe and goons are trying to fish the jar out of the water, but Sully and Nate destroy their crane, and it ends up bringing the city down around them. As the city is crumbling and all the named characters are trying to escape, the suits stay behind to shoot at Drake and Sully. This happens too many times in video games, and it happens too many times in this video game. Things falling down and collapse and explode around Nathan Drake, and it's crazy to have enemies just willing to stand and fire like they're in an MMO raid just so they can be killed by the player on their way out of danger. Drake even comments on this here. And listen, video game, doing something stupid and then pointing out that it's stupid does not negate the act of stupidity of the situation. Anyway, some stairs collapse and Marlowe is stuck in quicksand. She offers Nathan Drake's ring in exchange for saving her. Nate makes an attempt, but she ultimately drowns and Talbot goes into a rage. The game ends the same way it started, with a garbage fist fight. After some clunky button presses and QuickTime events, Talbot dies and the two heroes escape. The game ends with Sully giving a pretty good speech to Nate, and then Nate and Elena get back together and they walk over to a seaplane like the one Sully had at the start of Uncharted 1, and then credits. Now, I focus heavily on going through these games' stories because I think the stories are the reason to play an Uncharted game. They are interactive narratives, and while sometimes the interaction is bad, most of the time it's bearable. But the story was always enjoyable. Or at least that's the case for the first 2 games. Uncharted 1 wasn't the most groundbreaking adventure ever, but the characters were fun, and they made the otherwise bland adventure a lot more enjoyable than it could have been. Uncharted 2 stole bits from Uncharted 1, the caravan sequence, big-time villain and their henchman assistant, cursed treasure, lots of stuff. What Uncharted 2 added was grander locations, better designed environments, and unforgettable set pieces. Uncharted 3 has all of those things. It's a game Frankenstein together of bits and pieces from Drake's Fortune and from Among Thieves. Once I got to the end of the game, I had forgotten that this was the end of the original trilogy. The game is loaded with references because it's supposed to feel like the end of a trilogy. Remember Chloe? We gotta have Chloe. She's from Uncharted 2. Can't have the final chapter in the series and not include Chloe Fraser. And what about Sully's plane? Everyone remembers Sully's plane. It's from the first game. Gotta have that in there. Caravan chase sequence. Gotta have that in there. Well, Among Thieves has that big iconic train level. So what are we gonna do in Drake's Deception? Train? Let's make it a plane! Drake walks through the snow and passes out. Drake walks through the desert and passes out. It all makes sense. We can do it. Uncharted 3 stole a lot from Uncharted 2, which, to be fair, stole a lot from Uncharted 1. The thing is, Using the same mediocre gunplay and platforming is fine, but it's a lot less fine to be doing the exact same set pieces and missions, especially if the story is way worse. You would think the only Uncharted game to open with the villains right out the gate would give you the most fleshed out antagonists. And yet, the only info we really get about Marlowe and Talbot is from Cutter, who talks about a secret society, and that's it. Like, who is Kate Marlowe? Why is she obsessed with Francis Drake? She says that one line about how Nate is not worthy enough to touch whatever Francis Drake's items or something, and that's a weird thing to say. Who does she work for? Is she independent? What about Talbot? Who the fuck is this guy? Gabriel Roman, thief, crime boss, amateur treasure hunter. Lazarevich, war criminal, militant, soldier. Marlowe? British? Like, what's the plot of this game? Nathan Drake is apparently obsessed with finding this treasure we've never heard about and that he actively thwarted himself from finding years ago. He chases Kate Marlowe to steal her clues, and then Kate Marlowe chases Nathan Drake to steal his clues. All of Drake's friends tell him that he is obsessed, and if he doesn't give up on chasing this treasure, things will end badly. Drake meets up with Elena. She says the same thing. They find their way to a realm of the pillars and read the notes Francis Drake scrawled all over the murals, saying the same thing everyone else said. Drake gets put on a boat, he gets put on a plane, he walks through a desert, he rides a horse, he meets up with Sully, the two kill Marlowe and Talbot, they meet up with Elena, the game ends. It's frustrating how little this game holds together under any kind of scrutiny. I wasn't looking to hate this game. Nathan Drake would just wake up on a boat and I would ask, why? And the answer would be, why not? The levels in Uncharted 2 all blended together once they arrived in Nepal. It's a straight shot from the city all the way up to Shambhala. You follow Drake and you see how he gets from place to place. It's the same thing for Uncharted 1 also. But Uncharted 3 jumps around a lot, and in its jumping around, it just throws things at you. Yeah, Nate's like on a boat, now he's on a cruise ship, and now he just wakes up and he's on shore back to where he began, and yeah, sure, he falls off a plane, but it's okay. He found his way to the plot. It's also weird how little Elena is in this game. She was in a lot of 2 and almost all of Uncharted 1, and maybe she's only in like a quarter of Uncharted 3. Sully gets more screen time, but that's because the game wants to allude to his death like throughout the whole game. They're always like, be careful, Sully might die. The big setup is Drake's obsession with beating Marlowe will result in Sully's death. Instead, Sully just fake dies. Like in Uncharted 1. The treasure doesn't even seem that special. It's just like a spiked water supply. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe once I started not liking the game, it became harder and harder to enjoy. But I just didn't find this game fun. The characters are always telling Nathan Drake that he should just quit, that this is a bad idea. And that doesn't make for a very fun story. Drake and Elena are estranged and awkward around each other, and that doesn't make for fun cutscenes. Marlowe and Talbot share the exact same personality, which is being British and snobby towards Drake, and that's like nothing to play off of. And it's nowhere near as fun as Lazarevich and his over-the-top goonishness. And the gameplay would have had to have a major overhaul to carry this lackluster narrative. And the gameplay stayed the exact same, if not got worse, from Uncharted 1. At the end of my Uncharted 1 review, I said that Uncharted 1 was not a game worth playing. That if you missed out on it, you didn't miss anything at all. It's like a 5 out of 10, total middle of the pack. Uncharted 3 is a bad game. Maybe if it didn't have Uncharted characters, and if it didn't have the title name of Uncharted in it, it might be a more forgivable game. But this game didn't have to be a 10 out of 10. It just had to be more than Uncharted 1. Instead, it was worse. Who cares about what happens in this game? I mean, there are some good set pieces and good moments of gameplay, but the story is awful, and the experience overall is frustrating and boring. 2 adjectives you never want to hear about a game. I hate writing negative reviews. I really do. I'm just so bummed out about this game. Uncharted 3 had set out to be the conclusion to the series, full of callbacks and references to the other games. It was to be an end of the saga. And what a piss-poor ending it would have been. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good one. And take it easy.